everybody. Happy Tuesday. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm here with my colleague Manu, and he is going to be talking about context engineering today. So, if you want to up your game from prompt engineering, you are definitely in the right place. I don't know if you've met Manu before, if you've had the pleasure of being in one of his classes before or one of his webinars, but you are in for a treat. He is great at explaining things, and you might have seen him last July when he did a webinar for us called the Gen AI Toolkit. That was a wonderful webinar, and I will put that URL in the chat once we get going, just in case you want to go back and take a look at that. And we're just going to go ahead and get started in a minute. Uh, Okay, just want to take care of a little bit of housekeeping. We've got a chat, so if you've got questions, you can put them in the chat if you like. But we are all muted. There'll probably be a lot of us today, and we are really grateful that you've come today to join us for this hour because we know you're very busy. And on behalf of Ascendient Learning, now part of Accenture, we'd like to welcome you to this webinar. And just in case you haven't been with us, we are now part of Accenture, which is actually great news for you because we can still give you oh, hey, it's one of our trainers are here. Hey, Rap, from all over, from Dallas, from everywhere. This is awesome. So we are now part of Accenture. Great news for you because we can still give you that white glove personalized service. However, we now have everything that Accenture can offer us, like flexibility for self-paced learning, public courses, all the latest certifications, customized learning journeys, but we still get to work with all of our favorite instructors, including Manu, who is your instructor today. He has been teaching for a long time, more than a decade, but what really sets him apart is his ability to explain very complex topics and just kind of distill them down for everyone, but he's also really great at teaching higher level programming to data scientists. He's taught more than 5,000 students, over 100 organizations, 20 countries, and a lot of different technologies, including artificial intelligence, data science, machine learning. And one thing he's good at a lot of things, but one thing he's really great at is if you come to him and say, oh, my team needs to do this for a project, we need to learn that. He's really good at pinpointing exactly what you need to get the job done. And just to let you know, a couple things that are going on. We've got two webinars coming up in January. I'll give you all the details on that in the email that will come after the webinar. On the right side, we've got some courses that would be great follow-ups to this context engineering webinar, and that applied context engineering for agentic AI, that first class there on the right, that is actually brand new. We were just started offering it yesterday. And I think it's a really good one, and it's a great follow-up to this course. So we'll get you some more information on that. Oh, and this webinar is being recorded, so we'll get you that recording as well. All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop my camera. And I will stop my share and turn it over to Manu so he can dazzle you with context engineering.
All right. Welcome everyone. Super excited to be here. I'm gonna do my best to, let's say speak and emphasize and be as energetic as normal, but I'm a little bit sick. I came down with a fever last night. So, I'll do my best. It's a little bit easier because this is only 1 hour compared to the 8 hour class I have tomorrow. But that's just whatever. That's not what you're here for. You're here to learn about context engineering. And I'm about to share my slides. But before I share that first slide, I want to ask you guys a question, which is, what have you heard about context engineering? Like, why did you come here? Because I think that whenever I start off a class or even a webinar, I'd love to hear from students, what have they heard about this or why is this interesting? Okay, maybe you heard there's this new thing called context engineering, and that's cool, and put that in the chat. But I want to hear from you for a second. Why did you show up here? What have you heard about context engineering? Take a moment to type into the chat. before I start sharing my slides. Because I think the next slide kind of gives it away, so that's why I'm not sharing it yet. What do you think? Rap says context engineering is at the frontier. Uh-huh. Yeah. Anyone else have any ideas? Don't be shy now. Type into the chat. Okay. All right. Well, so here is what I would say. There we go. Miles comes back and said, I've heard it's getting a level, the next level of getting the most out of Gen AI systems beyond single turn prompt engineering. Nice. All right. So hopefully you're able to see my screen. This actually came out of a paper that I recently found that I thought was really interesting, which kind of says that actually everything is like context engineering. Again, anything that I say, maybe there are folks who may disagree with me, and that's totally okay. So I'm giving that disclaimer. But I like this perspective because it gets at a little bit of this shift in mentality. Because I think a big thing about this idea of context engineering, even though there are, yes, new tools and new capabilities, etc., new agents, and you have things like Claude Code, CLI, Gemini CLI, Gemini 3, whatever new models. I think that what has really brought context engineering to the fold is that we're actually all of a sudden we're able to actually see that all of these things that we were at least mentally distinguishing as separate ideas, they actually kind of converge to the same idea, to the same topic, right? So, before we had this idea of, oh, okay, well, how do you there's some aspects of this that we've taught in our classes earlier, right? Well, you have prompt engineering. Well, that's about how you communicate with the models, right? Hopefully you can see my circling there. Um, the drawing. And so prompt engineering, it's about how your oops, why is it doing that? Okay. Prompt engineering is about how you speak to the models. And then you have something like RAG, which is about, well, how do I get my data to be able to communicate the model? But if some of you have actually kind of dug into RAG, one of the things you may have realized somewhere along the way is that wait a minute. If okay, I'm in using RAG, right? So this class assumes that maybe you have some familiarity with some of these concepts, but if not, I'm kind of break it down quickly so that we can go towards more kind of the latest topics. So RAG, for those of you who haven't heard of this, RAG is related to or about, how do we get the AI model to be able to speak to our data? I think most everyone has heard of prompt engineering, how to communicate with a model, and you may have heard of all these different types of strategies like system prompts and using personas. You are a veteran coder, etc. Okay, but RAG is a little bit different. RAG, or at least appeared to be different, right? RAG it was about, well, I have all these documents and I want to use all of those documents in order to be able to, let's say, have some greater context about my business. I want the LLM to have context about my business or our private environment, our private code base, what have you, right? And when you actually dig into RAG, you kind of actually realize that it's a little bit of a hack in the sense that it's a little bit like prompt engineering, because actually what happens in RAG is that there's this augmented piece, retrieval. So you go retrieve the latest context, and there's a vectorization bit where, right, we convert it to a mathematical representation. But then there's this augmentation piece, which is actually you add it to the prompt and you enhance the existing prompt. And so there you can already kind of see that RAG is a type of prompt engineering, but even though, right, that's why there's some overlap between those bubbles, but it's not the same, right? But actually both of those can be considered to be a part of, right, this broader concept called context engineering. So if you have, come to this webinar to, think that, in some ways to consider, yeah, context engineering is this new thing. In a sense, it's really just a new mental model for looking at some of the same things, right? It's not necessarily a new core technology as such, but it's a shift in our mindset in how it is that we interact with AI systems, even agentic systems, where all of these kind of different ideas kind of merge into this blip of context engineering. Okay. So the other things we have, we'll see if we can touch on it a little bit. We have state and history. We have this concept of memory, and we have this idea of structured outputs, right? Um, when we think about state and history, well, think about this as really just, your conversation context, right? So our conversation context, and then you have one person, and then the agent responds, and then you have this back and forth, right? You can consider that as to be a part of the history, but maybe there's other things in the history, like you have some tools that are called. So what are tools? Tools are basically these capabilities that we can use that don't exactly that aren't exactly LLM calls, but they could be, for example, accessing an API, going and hitting Wikipedia to get a more factual result, going and hitting a calculator, going and doing some currency conversion, what have you, right? So there could be those types of things as well to get wrapped in. And then you also have this idea of memory. And so there's a little bit of this overlap between state history and memory. You can see there's a little bit of overlap here. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of these things. There's different types of memory like episodic memory, window buffer memory, etc. But beyond the terminology, I think the first kind of level set in changing the way that we think about this new age of generative AI is to, and this is again a thesis or hypothesis that some of the top field people in this area of context engineering, including some of the people who have thought to, let's say, coin the term. So maybe there's some bias there, but is to kind of reframe the way we think about this as everything is context engineering, at least in relation to AI, right? So what types of things are there that get sent to our agent? Well, you might have things like our instructions. You might have, what the user sends, right? What is going on in the current short-term memory, our current conversation. That's what I was talking about as the state history. There might also be long-term memory, which is, what are some persistent knowledges, some past projects, some past conversation. Some people call this episodic memory, right? So if you want to be able to say, where I got the Venn diagram. Yeah, totally, Rep. I will share that, and um I can share some links as well. I hope to also, for all the people attending this webinar, send out some webinar links, etc. From today's conversation. So retrieved information, right? So this is where that idea of RAG, right? What was considered quote unquote external documentation or databases or API, actually, we can put that all as a bucket of something that we are giving to the LLM. And then the available tools, which again are not necessarily a type of information, but they're some type of action that we're executing in order to meet some objective. And then even structured output. Actually, if you go back to this previous slide, you'll see that there's structured output is the one that kind of has a little bit of, it stakes out a little bit. And then you see there's a difference between parsing and instructions because and the reason that structured output sits a little bit outside is that structured output could potentially be a little bit or could be considered to be a little bit outside the scope of direct context engineering because we're manipulating something potentially with the outputs. And so, it depends on how one thinks through that. But we can consider even structured instructions as context engineering. Right. And there's a couple of interesting papers, right? there's one of the people who popularized this, that really took by storm because Toby Lutke, he mentioned that, it's very that basically talked about this term context engineering, and basically then Andre Karpathy, who's one of the AI, top voices in AI, kind of got on that bandwagon, and then everyone kind of started talking about this context engineering thing. Oh, what's context engineering? What is this thing? Right? And it actually kind of turns out that, well, we already were doing it maybe in different, we were doing it in maybe a scattered, non-unified way, thinking about this idea, right? Of what is it that we feed to the LLM? What does it actually use? All of the context that it uses to provide a result, because it turns out that, however you, let's say, slice the cat, whether that's, whatever I've written in the messages, whatever I provided as instructions, whatever I provided as a prompt, whatever tools calls I've given it, etc. All of that is at the end of the day fed into an LLM or agent that has limited memory. And this is gets into one of the really kind of interesting challenges and one of the key kind of areas of research and explorations right now, which is, well, how do we optimize our memory in order to be able to be more efficient, right? So, think about, a cheap, quote unquote, cheap demo versus a magical product, right? A simple demo agent, it can be, take less than a day to build something that maybe runs an API call and provides a response. And maybe some of you have done that as an exercise, right? But I think that the age that we're moving towards is, how do we really customize things and enrich the context that's provided to an LLM, so that maybe we have things like an actionalized personalized output because it has access to your calendar, your emails, your contacts, or your tools, right? Some of this comes out is in parallel or related, which is MCP. And depending on how you look at it, one could consider MCP as a type of context extension or context enhancement, but there's a little bit more nuances to that. So that's why I didn't include it in the slide, right? So from prompt to context engineering, you can think about it as a system, right? And you provide the right info at the right time in the right format, and you eventually want to basically get it to provide the right thing. So Anthropic has a really good image that they released in crafting good. I think the paper is called Context Engineering for Agents, or Providing Good Context for Agents. And here they compare prompt engineering for versus context engineering, right? So this kind of shows like the complexity a little bit of what we're talking about. If we kind of go back and peel back the layers and say, well, actually everything is context. And instead of thinking about, let's say, your ChatGPT window where, okay, maybe I have a system prompt. Oh, I got good at prompt engineering. Don't worry, it's still going to be useful. Um, and you have your system prompt, you have your user message, and the assistant comes back with a response, and oh well, I think very soon people started to realize, oh well, why don't I attach something? Why don't I give it a documentation? Why don't I give it access to my past history? And in some ways, we actually, started to fill these other things in, almost like experiments. And I think that, well, the only difference now is that now we're seeing kind of like a formalized framework, maybe, or a formalized clarity around what context engineering is. Um, so. Uh, got the sniffles, so hopefully you can hear and understand me all right. Okay, so we have, potentially different documents. We have our tools and tool calls and tool lists and maybe comprehensive instructions. Maybe we provide some additional domain knowledge. And all of those things, right? There's, maybe a space of potential context, and then you see there's a step curation, and then we actually provided some set of those things in the actual context window. And then the AI comes back with a response based on all of these things, which is actually a subset of all of the possible context we could have, let's say in our file system, in our database, in our server, what have you. And it comes back with maybe the necessary step or the necessary result. Let me pause and ask, does anyone have any questions? Yeah, did I hear someone? Okay, yeah, feel free to type those questions into the chat also, folks. Well, we could just, go on and talk about more topics and things, but I think that uh, it could be valuable to, let's say, maybe do a demo, and think about, okay, well, how do we apply this in practice, right? So one of the things that I've done before, I do this all the time, sometimes in my classes, is that, um, I'll open up an instance of Cloud Code or VS Code. Um, let me just put this one to the side. Okay. Oh, I lost the button. Gosh, of course. Give me 1 second. There it is. Okay. So, so let's just go to, let's just make a new dir, make a new, make a new directory, make a new dir. Okay. Make dir context engineering. Oh, actually, you see that I have a context engineering blog that I wrote. I will share some more about how I did that and stuff in a second. Okay. Okay. So here right now, I have absolutely nothing in there. Well, that's great, but what am I gonna do with that? I can't do anything with an empty space. So one of the ways that I've been working recently and is, well, let's find some good source materials. Um, say it asked a question, so I'm just checking that. Is the context is structured as what is shared in just a summary of combination of all the back and forth. In Claude Code Assist, when the context window is full, it would summarize, and therefore I'm thinking that it's not holding more of the memory and less of the completion from the prompt transaction history. Well, yeah, so there's aspects of the context that are let's say shared or stored. So for example, if I open up Claude, so Claude Code is an example, CLI or user interface that a lot of people have been using recently. It has a lot of nice things. So I can do something like context. And I can, it's probably for mine, it's going to have a ton of context that's used all the time. And it's kind of interesting to explore this and check this out, especially if you're, really nerdy about certain things like me. So you can see, sorry, it's a little bit hard to see on this app, but you can see that there's some aspects of some default system prompts, some system tools, some custom agents, some memory files, some messages, which is probably some background messages. There's some free space. And so check this out. This is really interesting. I actually only have 80,000 tokens of free space, right? 120 out of my 200,000 tokens are actually already used up. Now, is that optimal? No, not necessarily. There's also an auto compact buffer of 45,000. So there's going to be kind of like a sliding window as I use this tool. So Cloud Code is one of those things that really pushed me to explore and understand context engineering in more depth. But this is also, really cool and really useful to see, okay, what type of stuff do I already have stored? Oh, you can see I have some MCP servers, Model Context Protocol. So I have different agents and bots and things that I have, actually custom agents that I have stored, that I'm using, let's say, for specific things. And so, let's say, for example, I want to add something to context now that I'm in my context engineering bit. Okay, so what I can say is, what, go find the context engineering. Uh, So there's this link that I'll share in the chat, that, for example, go find context engineering, as well as other relevant documentation on content on Anthropic with context 7, and write some files that can help me master context engineering for my agents and tools. So, this is the type of query I do all the time. And you can try this out. You can, this article that I just posted in the chat, this was released not super long ago. This was released on September 29th, 2025, right? And so, Anthropic comes out, for example, with some great documentation. They're one of the really popular people. So you see it immediately asks me for a web fetch. So it's going to go and it's going to fetch Anthropic's context engineering article. It's going to really research related Anthropic documentation via Context 7. Have folks heard of Context 7? Give me a thumbs up if you've heard of Context 7. So context seven, what it does is that this is a really, really useful, MCP server. So it's basically a way to get up-to-date documentations for LLMs and AI code editors. So I absolutely love it. It's fantastic. It allows you to have a slightly more qualified source of truth, let's say, and a better means of building something out, right? And remember that, I'm starting this project and I'm starting from scratch, right? And one of the other really interesting things or useful things about using Claude Code or other CLIs that I really like, because I kind of have I don't know what the diagnostic term for it is, but I get I if you had this happen where you think of another thing that you want to ask it, or the next thing that you want to ask it, but you don't want to have to wait for it to finish. Gosh, that's so boring, right? So I can actually just go ahead and ask that. So I can say, you know what, for each context that you go ahead and fetch, I want a summarized document under a new folder, docs. And so it has some comprehensive research. It's building that comprehensive research, and now it's building out these docs. And so, this is a really, first of all, when working with any new library or building a new coding agent, you probably know that, oh, well, I have to work with such and such and such frameworks. This is a super useful way. In this case, it's kind of um, uh, well, it's kind of nifty in the sense that I'm actually using this to research Claude itself, which I often do, using actually the live documentation, because of course, if I ask the LLM directly, it might fall flat on its face or give me really old and outdated information, right? So, in a sense, what I was telling you earlier about, okay, we talked about these things all tool calls, which is basically I'm actually going and hitting the website and going and fetching the live content right now, and I'm incorporating that into my context, and I'm taking, asking the AI, take that stuff and then go ahead and summarize it, right? So those types of actions and commands are really useful, to think about it in this overall mindset of I'm building out the context, right? So if I'm gonna start a project on context engineering, it could be I'm gonna start a project on medical coding, or I'm gonna start a project on MongoDB, on Prisma, on Swift AI, on Next.js, whatever it is that I want to go do, right? I can, for example, one of the first things I can do, and I typically do, is that I'll go and get all the documentation of the library, and let's say put it into the context. Now, sometimes that might be a ton of documentation context. But there's other ways to kind of get around that, where there's these things called skills and other types of things where, once it's done all of this research about context engineering, I can say, for example, now use here's, there you go. It built a little document, that that is related to building context engineering. It built a little guide for me, right? Oh, progressive disclosure, really cool. Tool output optimization, right? It built a bunch of these things. We might not even have the time to talk about all of these things that it built out. And I'll see if I can send you some of these things. Um, and we're going to talk about attention, budget, and context fraud in just a second, right? Research identified context fraud as tokens counts increase, model accuracy and recalling information decreases, right? This is like human working memory limitations, and this is exactly the next thing we're going to talk about. So very cool. It built out a bunch of things. It built out a nice little master guide. So do I want to create this? Yes, I want to create that. Great. Now use the master. I'm going to say now use the master guide and all of the the context 7 docs gathered in order to build me a context engineering skill that will help me optimize my context window all the time. For example, right? I could have done any number of things. And what is a skill? Well, at least in the nuance or the language of Claude Code, this is an idea of basically being able to have a certain type of body of knowledge, right? It's another type of context. It's a certain type of body of knowledge that it's provided and that it sits there and can load at will when it sees a relevant topic come up. Now let's actually go over to on a new tab. And so you see here we have uh looks like we just have one guide so far, right? But maybe I can say things right. Write a couple of different core implementation pieces, thinking through all implementation considerations based on the master guide into the docs and find the relevant piece within the Anthropic documentation and document it with real code. For example, right? So these are I'm providing this example in order to you can see now it already started to write docs. Okay, Anthropic context engineering article, Anthropic building effective agents, Anthropic skills system. Now, just because it wrote that doesn't mean it's completely correct. It doesn't mean that it's on point. But I do have slightly more confidence potentially in that thing because, oh, well, maybe it did a bunch of research that it actually pulled from the actual agent documentation itself, right? Context management, it was able to pull out and figure out. And so it's kind of figuring out all of these different angles and avenues to build this out. And now, what I hope people are noticing is that, I started with, basically an empty folder. I added maybe one link and then said Anthropic documentation, which is another website, a body of knowledge. And all of a sudden, what I'm doing now is I'm building out my knowledge, right? I don't always have to do it like that. I may just have a bunch of business documents and I say, here's the link to my business documentation. I want you to go look at it. I want you to traverse it and explore it and understand all these things about it. It may be like that. Or it may be, let's say, a coding task where you have to go and find out about your use case and your space, right? I had a very interesting talk, or I had a very interesting similar demo like this, where I was sharing some stuff with some folks in a insurance company. I won't name names, right? And right in front of them, I told them, okay, what are some core sources in this domain? Tell me about them. I found the sources. I went and grabbed, some like two, three PDFs, put those into the docs. From those docs, I, expanded my research scope. I had to go and then build a bunch of other things and, build out enterprise infrastructure, right? So you can see here, large MCP response can fill up context quickly. That's fine. So, all of what this is doing is that it's basically allowing me to go get more information. The insurance docs, no, I didn't even have to embed them because it's kind of when I'm using at least a tool like Claude Code, the documents are sitting there in the context depending on when I access them. So what I basically did was I said, look at these documentations, map out the problem space, map out the use case, give me a, chart the path forward. Map out what the application looks like, map out what the architecture looks like, start building out the architecture, go to this framework to start building out the website. And so you can, for example, take a use case, pop some PDFs in there. And again, this is a starting point. It's not necessarily, the production grade thing that you're going to do all the time, right? But you can kind of think about this as a more dynamic way, for context. Yes, it can read PDFs totally. That is pretty good at PDFs. Yeah. Um, and funny thing is that I did something like this. Let me see if I can find it. Um, this is one of the things that, and if Dan is on the call, I don't know if we may or may not share it. But I'm just going to show you, for at least research purposes. It was very cool that one of the things that this did was that, I just started exploring context engineering as I prepped for this, and all of a sudden it started to, write a blog post, and I just started seeing that, okay, cool. It built out a whole set of blog posts and it actually put it up on a website. And I thought that was a really cool output, kind of from everything that I was just kind of researching, exploring, and actually I was surprised that the references that it had included, recent books, actual documentation, relevant research papers. Some of them are kind of older, but some of them are newer. But I was actually pretty impressed with the blog that it came out with. Now, again, is this kind of like, do I expect that every single one of these codes will actually work? No. And so, you have to remember that this is the caveat and the real kind of potential downside of using AI generated content, and there are consequences to just blindly using it, um, as we found. But it's interesting. It's really interesting to go explore a space and to research the space. At least if you know a little bit, about some of these topics, and then you can also actually go find, real articles and real human written sources to be able to do these things, right? So a couple of the core ideas that we've been talking about. We talked about retrieval, RAG. We're talking about memory, right? How do you think about being able to look at the actual token economics? That's really the new name of the game. That's become more and more one of the really important kind of pieces of this whole game. Um, so yeah, um, go back and check on our reference. Our little guy here is running on context engineering, so it built out a cheat sheet. Um, Actually, one of the funny things about Cloud Code is it makes just so many markdown files and stuff. It's kind of a headache. So I built my own markdown editor using Cloud Code. That was pretty fun. Because again, we're at an age where we can do these types of things. So this markdown editor that you're seeing, I actually built it. Um, and it turns out to be really useful for kind of looking through all of these documentation. And there's a lot of folks who are in this game right now that are kind of in a similar boat because there's just so much documentation produced. But here's the really interesting thing about that. It's actually really useful and important to actually save those markdown files, because that then begins to potentially be part of your kind of baked in context that you can potentially access at any time, right? So one of the things that I'll often do is I'll say something like create a as I'm doing more advanced things, I'll say create a progress.md and make sure to maintain it. throughout our working session and in this project. And then I can even say things like, okay, let's start, let's, write kind of like a core project idea. And so you see what is, I think cool about, at least hopefully it's cool for you guys, about this whole idea is that we're rearranging the way that we think about context, right? We were kind of thinking about, okay, prompts and sending things back and forth as one idea. And then we were thinking about, okay, training on documents and vectorizing, embedding those documents. And we think about that as another idea. And now I really think about all of it as context. So sometimes my prompt is, this entire document, this folder of documentation is now something that I can use to go build other things, right? Um, say the ask, with a focus on duplicating a successful effort, say I figured out the best way to structure a combination of Terraform and Packer setup to build VM images. Now I want Claude to remember this preference for the next effort. What are the different ways to internalize this, if I may call it a skill? Well, so if you're using Claude Code, say one of the things that you can do is that you can write let's say a YAML script, you can write a startup script that you always run. So for example, I have this thing that I say that's called startup. So I can say initialize Cloud Code session. So you can say startup Terra, or this idea of commands is really useful because the commands actually nowadays are like the long version of prompts, right? So when I run this idea of startup, what it's going to do is it's going to change the type of output style and some other kind of nuanced things that I've said. And okay, it's gonna basically update check my skills. It's gonna read from my commands and skills and all this stuff and kind of get itself ready to go. So that's one way that you can do that. If you want to remember preferences, maybe you load the preferences. And you can see it says, okay, here's my Cloud Code environment initialized. I have this, and this, and I can use /help for commands, show available commands. Um, uh, there's a lot of different potential commands that one can use. Some of these are kind of default ones. It looks like it's not really showing me. Oh yeah, there are custom commands here. So let's look at it. There's a lot of potentially complex custom commands that we could have. So for example, uh, let's say, okay, I don't know. It's not, this is a new update, so I don't know why it's not showing it to me. That's fine. I can show it to you elsewhere. Um, um, so if I go into my .claude, in my .claude, I have different things like commands, config. So commands are really useful, especially /commands, because they allow me to, for example, do things like, let's say I want to go learn about something, right? So I can say I want to go learn. Okay, what does this command actually do? So what's nifty about this is that it's a whole set of things that I've defined about, here's the output structure, go and let's say, Wrap knows about this, React components, React server components, right? And so I want to go learn about this, go do this, go learn about all of these different things. And it'll go and actually research the web and go find information, et cetera, right? So that's just one example, but there's more complicated things that I can do also. I have things like, how to, search for the available agents that I have, how to, do any number of things. And so one of the new kind of trends that we're really seeing now is that we're starting to see prompt as like a type of code, right? We're beginning to be able to use our own prompts as a type of workflow or a type of code. And it's been incredibly wild and crazy. It's surprising how well some of it works, and there's sometimes it doesn't work, and that's also true. But I've actually been really impressed with this whole idea of prompts. So all of these quote unquote slash commands are basically, for example, here it defines something with semi YAML format, and all of this is a prompt, right? So all of this, every time I run /CTX7, it's going to run all of this stuff. And so I think that that is, a really kind of interesting methodology, right? So I have other things like I have meta prompting framework. I want to come back and talk about this in a little bit later. It's a little bit potentially complex. And I want to come back and actually talk about that one and actually share a GitHub for you that could be maybe nifty a little bit for your use later on. Okay, so I'm going to go back to um, sharing my slides, and we're looking at time. Um, and yeah, we're almost at time. So I'm just gonna do, hopefully the demo was more useful than just, I don't know, me kind of harping about the idea and the concepts, right? Hopefully it was useful to actually kind of see how these things are used and how they're built. Um, so let me just a couple of last things that I want to point out and things to consider are that, things that often happen is that we might get our context poisoned. The context, we might have context distraction, context class, context confusion. So, what do all of these things mean? I'll send you a blog to learn more about this, but essentially, right, think about all the ways that something can go wrong with your context. Here, it could be an external threat actor. Here, there could be maybe contradictory context that's going on that's showing up in your work, in your file folders, etc. Part of context engineering is actually basically like mental organization, right? Is about information organization, and that skill that we have as humans, right? The better we're able to organize the information, in a simple way, in a straightforward way, in a well-structured way, the better an AI LLM agent is able to read it and process it. It really comes down to that. Um, so when we think about, this overall process, right? So we talked a little bit about MCPs. We gave this example of context seven, right? We didn't talk so much about agents, but the agent, for example, could be a context seven agent, or it could be like a documentation agent, right? I have a deep researcher agent, for example, that'll go research stuff for me. And I don't want to, you can get these slides, I think. But the important thing about, this whole process, number one, is to understand, okay, what are the potential sources, right? So the first piece, I think the main thing that we already covered is okay, first of all, recognizing that all of it is fed into the context. And then the next portion that I think that one kind of has to discover or explores on their own. And then in some cases, it's not even clear unless you're really building from the ground up a production application. If you're just using something like Cursor or Claude Code, we don't even really see exactly all the stuff that they're doing for the context engineering in the background. It's just kind of being done, right? But there are some references, and I'll share some of those references. Um, you know, um, one of the things that is good to know, for example, is that sometimes you might automatically have a system prompt, you might have a user query, or you might have your query, and there might be even be some retrieved content. And really think critically about what is the context. Um, think critically about, where is the retrieved context coming from, and what is being stored, right? There's also a lot of ways to log these. One of the, really nifty tools I built was, actually logging every single thing that is using context. And if you have a limited context window, like 200,000, some of it already is being used by your MCP servers, your agents, and all this stuff. And you only have like 80,000 tokens at the end of the day, like I just showed you earlier. Then being really efficient with your memory and your tokens is useful. One of the ways that people do this is with things like structured input or by doing things like, for example, one of the things that I do now that I've built out all of this documentation is that in my source folder, in my root folder, I'll include like a depth chart, right? I'll include these are all the files. This is the file path and location of all the files so that, if you have a question about something, go look in these files. This file has this file has this file has this, just one-liners. And I use the agent to build that. And that's, kind of like a self-referential mechanism so that you're not loading all of that at once, but rather you load it kind of like it's like lazy evaluation. You load it on demand. And the more optimally or efficiently one can load things on demand as they're needed, but without having to load everything at once, which is something I think that happens a little bit with RAG, is that, well, we try to embed everything that's there, and then we have to go, find this huge needle in the haystack, and it's, not necessarily easy. Underneath the hood with context engineering and with these modern tools, right, they're obviously being able to when it's doing the read with MCP, it's essentially doing something like that. When it's reading some file on your data, then it's essentially doing something similar, but it's not quite the same as embedding. Embedding en masse your whole file folder. The other thing that I'll say is that it's really important to remember this lost in the middle phenomenon. So it's just a tip, but you can do things like recite things by, if you have some objectives that you stated at the beginning of your context, you do this thing, this thing, this thing, and you observe number one, two, and three. And one of the things that you can do at the next step compared to step N1 is that you can actually say, here's those objectives again, or you can even have like a type of hook to load these automatically so that those objectives are top of mind. And what happens is that this area here, in case that's forgotten, the core objectives, which is really at the beginning, are not forgotten. And then you're getting kind of double bang for your buck because you're putting it at the beginning and at the end. And so it's obvious in the model that's very important. There is this, phenomenon called lost in the middle effect that we have noticed already in prompt engineering for a very long time. This is something to consider. Anho asked, could you go back to the slide about common failures and elaborate a bit more in detail about them? Sure. Yeah. When we think about context poisoning, I really think about this as, you got sometimes this can be a threat actor. Sometimes I think that there's a little bit of overlap and maybe some terminology stuff here, depending on how one defines it. Did someone intentionally or even accidentally, mug up the context? Like, I'm talking about this project, and that project exists in this folder with this nice organizational structure, but then all of a sudden I'm talking about that in this other folder that information is not supposed to be there, right? And so that's an example, right? Or even if you have some existing context within, you have, let's say, documentation sets. Let's say, for example, I'm loaded a bunch of documentation. I loaded the Anthropic documentation and context engineering documentation. Well, what if tomorrow Anthropic changes that documentation? And then I say, well, go fetch that stuff again, right? Did I think to archive the old stuff? Did I, put that aside? I can save it, but I should set it aside if it's not kind of, currently working and functioning documentation, for example. This is very common with documentation. Context distraction, I think, context distraction and confusion, they're a little bit nuanced. I will send an article about this so you can look at it a little bit more. It's a great article by BV8 on this. And so I can share that one. The context engineering guide. Is it this one? Yeah. Uh-huh. So let me share my screen on this one. So that comes from this guide. Um, right. So the distraction could be too much past information. The poisoning could include hallucinated information, right? It could be wrong information. It could be poisoned in the sense that it's an outside actor that's doing that. Context can yeah, I will share the link, Emil, no problem. Irrelevant tools or documents crowd the context, distracting the model and causing it to use the wrong tool or instructions, right? This is like if you're the type of person that likes to have 100 different tools because you just went and downloaded all of them and then you don't realize that actually you're sitting there and all of those MCP tools are sitting there in your context window and taking up space and actually reducing the quality of all subsequent LLM outputs just because you want to be prepared with all the MCPs you have, you're gonna have a potentially bad time, right? So, just doing things like having too many tools could be, not the best idea. If I'm using GitHub Copilot and I'm one of those people that never closes my tabs, well, maybe I should close some of the tabs because, if I have things across different projects and I have all of those contexts and the system is trying to look at all of those different open tabs and think about all of those different open tabs in order to give you a coding suggestion versus you have just the tabs based on the things that you're actually related to working on now, then it's going to be quite a bit different, right? So the context window is a really, really important piece. I can't emphasize it enough. That's the thing that I keep coming back to. That more and more I'm seeing that more and more people are talking about this and thinking about it more critically because we're kind of with RAG 2.0 as people call it or whatever, we could just keep building more and more infinite context window and etc. Right? But then what about the fact that things get lost in the middle, right? And so what we really need is, okay, how do we most efficiently work with the resource that we have? How do we organize and structure our thinking, our queries, and the messages and the tools and the documents that are sent to our LLM? And how do we organize it in a way that is clean, right? And so the last thing, this is we're at pretty much time. So memory types. So there's things like long-term memory, episodic memory, semantic memory, procedural memory. Weaviate is just not affiliated with them at all. It's just an example that I really liked. I really like their diagrams and some of these. What is the current scratch pad of what we're doing? That's kind of like what I was showing you earlier in Claude Code. And then, what is my context window actually consisting of, right? What is the process and the organization of things and the sequence of events that took place in order for the agent to produce one new result, right? And it's pretty cool the stuff that and for me it's absolutely fascinating actually the things that one can build. Um, you know, I will give one last example of a interesting tool of recursive meta prompt. Show your prompts in order to develop out my context engineering system. And so one of the really interesting spaces that I'm exploring now, that's a lot of fun, is meta prompting. I'm exploring this thing called category theory, that's advanced math, and in one of those papers, it talks about. There's other people who talk about meta prompting that doesn't necessarily involve post PhD math, but one of the really, I showed this to some students recently, they loved it. It um, what it'll do is that it'll automatically kind of come up with the prompt. It'll provide an initial prompt, and then what it does is essentially what it tries to do is it tries to think through the logic and the steps. I'll execute the RMP loop. This is recursive meta prompting to develop your context engineering system, showing my prompts at each iteration. And so this is some fun stuff that I've been just playing around with. Um, yeah, I can share the PowerPoint. Yeah, does anyone have any questions? And can we share the PowerPoint? I think we can, right?
Yeah, yeah, sure, definitely. I am, oh, and also just in case y'all didn't hear it at the very beginning, this is recorded and we will be sending out the recording to everybody probably sometime tomorrow. So you can listen to this webinar again and again.
Great. Yeah.
And I've got two things actually also to share. Okay, oh, thanks,
Go ahead,
Manu. See
man.
that? I feel weird just talking without like There we go. Um, so two things I said I was going to put in the chat before the end, the context engineering course, which is 2 days. So of course, over 2 days you can get hands-on, it can be customized. Right now it's just for private groups, not for public trading. So if you've got two or more people, definitely let us know. We can customize that for you and help you build whatever it is you need to make your business run. And also, Manu did a great Gen AI Toolkit webinar. So there we go. That should be hopefully in the chat now. Did I do that? Oh, nope. Hold on. Sorry. There we go. All right. Looking for any other questions coming in? Yeah, we're just about at time, but we might have time for one or two questions if they come in. But thank you for doing this and hanging in there, with your fever and all. But I couldn't tell at all. I didn't feel like you were having a fever dream at all during the webinar. Um, but no, it was great that you did that. We really appreciate it. Okay, and just while we're waiting for anything to come in, do you mind if I just share my screen for a second?
Yeah,
Okay.
please.
All right, thank you. Just going to go ahead. Hopefully, you can see in a moment here our homepage. I'm just going to go down here to generative AI and agentic AI. There we go. And we've got quite a lineup here. I'm going to go into the agentic AI topic. And in here, you'll find Applied Context Engineering for Agentic AI course. This is the 2 day course I was talking about. We'll be emailing this to you too, just in case you're interested. By the time you leave there, you'll be able to build multi-agent systems with content separation and sharing, explain the constraints and the optimizations, design agents, and analyze and mitigate any context-related failure modes and more. So this might be a great next step if you are interested. All right, let's go back. I will stop my share and check to see if we've got anything else. Okay, I've got you. Thank you, Manu. You shared your GitHub resource.
Yeah, that link is just one thing that I've been working on that has been a lot of fun, where it will continuously kind of improves itself in its prompt. And I call it recursive meta prompting or meta prompting. And it's actually what's interesting is I started kind of exploring this, and then all of a sudden I started seeing YouTube videos pop up where Google and all of these other folks are at the same time started talking about this. So I think that prompt as code, context engineering, and these types of things like meta prompting. Maybe we'll do a webinar on meta prompting or on spec-driven development, because I think those are like related or useful ideas too. But let us know in the chat if you have some ideas that you want to, if you have some topics that you want to learn about, please do let us know in the chat. We'd love to hear about, what's exciting to you, what have you heard about, what's interesting, what would make you say, I want to learn about that.
Yeah, no, that would be great. People did ask for context engineering, so we got with Manu and we made this happen. So thank you all
Yeah.
for suggesting it, and yeah, thank you for doing this webinar. It was amazing. All right, let's see, maybe one more. Oh, yeah, the PowerPoint link, I think it's in there. It's up a little bit. It's a document.
Did
Okay, you got
I
it. I think yeah, you sent it as it looks like it's a yeah,
context
here we go.
engineering webinar.pdf? Oh yeah, I did send it. Yeah, but I just sent it again.
And yeah, and also this is being recorded and we'll give you the whole recording probably sometime tomorrow after I process it and take out all my on my video editor. Okay, great. All right. Well, yeah, we're a little bit over time, so let everybody go, release you into the world, and use all your context engineering for good. All right. Hope to see you soon in the next webinar, and I hope to see you back for our webinar again. We always love when we get your time, so thank you so much. All right, everyone, have a wonderful day. See you soon. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.